Please be seated. So, we have this picture in that last chapter of Colossians of the people that Paul had round him at that time. People who he'd sent, he'd worked with in ministry, people who we hear something of in other parts of the Bible. But a snapshot at that time of people, I'm just looking here, who are declaring that Jesus Christ is Lord of their life and that they were wanting to serve him alongside Paul in different ways. And here today we have a list here of people declaring as they come to worship here tonight, seeking to serve Jesus Christ as Lord in this place and just a little bit down the road down at Morecambe. But what can we learn from this last chapter in the book of Colossians? Now I think that Colossians 4 verses 2 to 6 is the passage I've heard on preached more than any other. It was a must hear at the Christian Union at university. I don't know if one or two of you perhaps been involved with the university Christian unions at other places. Colossians 4, 2 to 6 is a must listen to, must go to passage. But we're not going to go there tonight. We're going to go to a passage which is maybe one of those you skip over. How many times have we gone through, we've looked ahead and said, oh, it's just a little, I'll move that one. How many times have we got the asked to read? It's been a long list. And we know about Paul writes about in Colossians. More than just these people here, just names. A lot of them just me. About these people. Now I know some things about these people. I'm hoping that you might find them out for me. What do we know? What do we know about Tychicus? Anybody want to correct the pronunciation? No? Tychicus, is it? Are we going to go with that? Yeah, we'll go with Tychicus. What do we know about Tychicus? What does the Bible say about him? Dear brother, faithful minister, fellow servant in the Lord. Well, let's have a quick turn to Ephesians. Ephesians, just a couple of books before Colossians. The book of Ephesians, chapter 6, verse 21. Keep your finger in Colossians 4. And when we're in Ephesians 6, verse 21, we read that Tychicus is a dear brother, faithful servant in the Lord. Verse 22, Paul is sending him to the Ephesians to share about what he's doing. Tychicus is an associate of Paul, a representative, someone who Paul trusts to go to these different places to tell them about what he's been doing and what God's been doing at work. We see that also in 2 Timothy, if you wanted to go there as well. 2 Timothy 4:12. It says, only Luke is with me, get Mark, bring him with you because he's helpful to me in my ministry. I sent Tychicus to Ephesus. Now sometimes we might read a passage like Colossians 4 and think, well, what's the background to that? And isn't it great that God, by sovereignty through the people he's got to write the Bible, has given us the background in other bits of the Bible. So that's what we're going to find out about these characters in Colossians 4. Tychicus, Paul's representative and associate, someone he trusts. But what do we find out about the next guy? What do we know? Right, I'm going to put this out there. Some of you might know a bit about the next man, Onesimus. What do we know about him? Some of you have already spoken tonight, so you've already broken the ice. What do we know about Onesimus? Again, that might be a wrong translation. What do we know about him? If you want, go for the easy answer and quote from Colossians 4. What do we know about Onesimus?
He ran away from his master.
He ran away from his master, so he was a slave. Uncle John, how do we know that? Well, but if I didn't know it, how are you going to tell me where is it? Where are we at? How do we know that?
I was very much challenged from that as a young Christian. And it helped me a lot.
Right.
Yeah. But
Were you on the run as well at the time?
Paul became the mediator between Onesimus and Philemon.
Brilliant. And there's your answer in the book of Philemon, which is a few books on, Paul's letter to Onesimus' master. So I don't know if you want to turn there, which is a few books further on. Go through the T's and the T's, Timothy and Titus. And we find out here about this man, Onesimus. Again, Paul writing, probably at the same time as he wrote the book, the letter to the Colossians. And we see in Philemon, he says in verse 10, I appeal to you for my son Onesimus, who became my son while I was in chains. So yeah, Onesimus, slave of Philemon, gone on the run, seems to have met Paul and become a Christian. Paul declares him his son. Well then, what's the issue? Onesimus has gone against Philemon. He's probably on the run. We read in verse 18, if you're there. If he has done you any wrong or owes you anything, charge it to me. So Onesimus, this slave, on the run, Paul's sending him back to Philemon, saying, look, Onesimus is a changed man. Probably like you were back in the day, Uncle John. Changed man by Christ, and he needs to go and reconcile with Philemon. Again, isn't it great that we know that? We know that. We read that in Colossians, but then we find out more in Philemon. So let's carry on. We're getting going. What do we know about Aristarchus? A bit harder on this. Anything we know about Aristarchus? Again, go for the easy answer. Colossians 4. He's a fellow prisoner, Stephen. Yes. So this man is enduring like Paul at this time in prison, probably in Rome, a prisoner at this time. But why is he a prisoner? What has he seen? If we go back to Acts 19, so go back a few books. Matthew, Mark, Luke, John, then into Acts. Acts chapter 19, verse 19. Is it 19? No, 29. I can't read my own writing. Yeah, Acts chapter 19, verse 29. The whole city, this is Ephesus, is in uproar. The people have seized Gaius, and Aristarchus, Paul's travelling companions from Macedonia, and rushed as one man into the theatre. So Aristarchus has been with Paul when it's really, really kicked off big style in Ephesus. Well, then more than that, in Acts chapter 20, verse 4, Paul sets out, he was accompanied by Sopater, son of Pyrrhus, from Berea, Aristarchus and Secundus from Thessalonica. So he's gone to Greece. Been in Ephesus, gone to Greece, and then Acts chapter 27, if you wanted to skip on a little bit. Paul sets sail for Rome in Acts chapter 27. We boarded a ship, we put it out to sea. Aristarchus, a Macedonian from Thessalonica, was with us. So again, we're learning more about this man. This man must have seen some amazing things as he journeyed with Paul. And here he is, he's in chains, but he sends his greetings. Okay, now, here's a dead easy one. Who's Mark? Who's the next one? Who's Mark? Who's Mark? Cousin of Barnabas. If in doubt, go for the Colossians 4. What else do we know about Mark? What else do we know about Mark? He wrote a book with about 16 chapters in it. And he couldn't think of a name. So he gave it his own name. Victoria. Brilliant. Yes, let's have a look at Acts 15 verse 38. Acts 15 verse 38. Again, Victoria's not made that up. She's discovered it from remembering Acts 15. Sometime later, Paul said to Barnabas, this is verse 36, "Let us go back and visit the brothers in all the towns where we preach the word of the Lord and see how they are doing." Barnabas wanted to take John, also called Mark, with them, but Paul did not think it wise to take him because he had deserted them in Pamphylia and had not continued with them in the work. They had such a sharp disagreement that they parted company. Barnabas took Mark, sailed to Cyprus, but Paul chose Silas and left, commended by the brothers to the grace of the Lord. So we believe and we think that Mark wrote the Gospel, Mark. But what we know there is that they've had this falling out with Paul. So isn't it great that we know that? So that when we read, "My fellow prisoner Aristarchus sends you his greetings, as does Mark," we now can see that Paul and Mark have made up. Probably 12 years, they think, between the split. And it all seems okay. They seem to have reconciled. So again, we're getting more of a picture about who these people are that Paul writes about. Now here's one for you guys up in farmland. Barnabas. Who's Barnabas? Acts chapter 4, verse 36. I think Barnabas is fantastic. Acts chapter 4 verse 36. Barnabas isn't here, but he's referred to, and I think it's great to just remind us who Barnabas is. Acts 4 verse 36. Right at the start of the early church, we have this man here, Joseph, verse 36, a Levite from Cyprus, whom the apostles called Barnabas, which means son of encouragement. He sold a field he owned and brought the money and put it at the apostles' feet. I don't know how much you get for a field nowadays. Depends. That's a very good answer. And it probably depends where the field is as well. But Joseph thought, well, I can give up this field. I want my money to go to the cause of the gospel and for the early church. I don't know, do you have any friends that you don't call by their name, but you call by something else? I used to play football with a player who was called Frank. He was always called Frank. When he came to the team, I had met him before, and everybody called him Frank all the time. So I just assumed that his name was Frank. And it was only a while later that I discovered his name was James. Well, because he had a big head, they thought he looked like Frank Sidebottom. So they called him Frank all the time. Now, I don't know, do you have people like that? We've had a lady, a dear member, Janie Gracie, some of you may know, a member of our church, passed away a couple of weeks ago. Now, her name was Mary, but she always went by Janie. So when I've been in hospital, which is when I saw Victoria, it was quite confusing because you'd look on the boards and it would say her other name. But I don't know, maybe some of you know people who are not called by their name they're given. And wouldn't it be amazing to be Barnabas, that he was such an encouragement that they just gave up calling him Joseph. They just wanted to call him Barnabas all the time because it means son of encouragement. I think that's fantastic. That he was so positive that they just had to call him that all the time. Well, next, let's move on. We get to verse 11 and we write that Paul talks about Jesus. Not the Jesus, this is Jesus who's called Justus. He's a Jew. He's a Jew. That must have been a great encouragement to Paul. Maybe the Jews were being very critical of Paul at this time. So for Paul to have a fellow Jew alongside him would have been a real encouragement. Sometimes, I don't know, I reckon some of you have probably got very similar histories. maybe grown up round here, possibly do similar occupations, or had similar backgrounds. It can be a great encouragement, probably at lambing time maybe, to know that others are going through that. They're going to fall asleep on a Sunday morning, just like you are. But it can be helpful sometimes to have people from the same background as you walking with you. Then we get to Epaphras. Now, we don't have to go very far to find out more about Epaphras. What do we know about Epaphras? Verse 12. What can we glean about him? Again, if in doubt, go to Colossians 4. What do we know about Epaphras?
He's a man of prayer.
He's a man of prayer, yes. He's always wrestling in prayer. Where's he from? Where's he from?
Colossae.
He's from Colossae. He's one of you. He's not an off-comer. He's grown up in Colossae. And he wrestles in prayer. It says in Colossians 1 verse 7 that it was Epaphras who shared the gospel with the Colossian church. He was the faithful minister of Christ. He shared God's grace with them. So Epaphras is almost like the father. Maybe they called him Uncle Epaphras. I don't know. Maybe they did. I don't know. But he knew the patch. He knew the people. So for Paul writing to them to say, Epaphras is with me, that would have meant a lot to these Colossians. Then what do we know about Luke? What do we know about Luke? He's a doctor. Yeah. What else do we know about Luke?
Did a bit of writing.
He did a bit of writing. Yeah. He wrote, again, not very imaginative, he wrote the Gospel Luke, and also he wrote Acts. And quite a bit of Acts is personal experience as he journeys along with Paul. Yeah. So that's Luke the doctor. We could talk a lot more about him, but we're not going to. I want to just touch briefly on Nympha. What do you know about Nympha? Absolutely nothing, because she's not referred to anywhere else in the Bible. Except that in Colossians 4:15, she has a church in her house.
She seems to be the only one of the group that is female.
Yep. And she has a gift. She seems to have that gift of hospitality. I reckon there's probably one or two on here who've got a good gift of hospitality. You know, the gift of hospitality is so important, particularly in that early church when they didn't have anywhere to meet. They had to meet somewhere, so they met in homes. Archippus, we know a little bit about him. He's referred to in Philemon as a fellow soldier. See to it that you complete the work you have received in the Lord. That's a great verse to memorize, isn't it? See to it that you complete the work you've received in the Lord. Right, last but by no means least, or perhaps by means least, let's have a look at Demas, verse 14. What do we know about Demas? He forsook Paul. Demas. So at this point, Paul says Demas sends greetings. But if you can quickly turn to 2 Timothy, 2 or 3 books further on, 2 Timothy chapter 4, verse 10. 2 Timothy chapter 4, verse 10. And Paul says to Timothy in 2 Timothy 4, do your best to come to me quickly, for Demas, because he loved this world, has deserted me and has gone to Thessalonica. So Demas working with Paul, but then later deserts him. He falls in love with the world. We were talking this morning, we're going through Joseph at the moment. And this morning we looked at Joseph and Potiphar's wife. And Potiphar's wife nags him day after day after day after day. And he resists. And just that wonderful picture of a faithful man of God resisting the temptation of the world, which Demas seems not to have done. He has gone and followed the will of the world. Thank you for your help. I hope you don't feel shortchanged, having had to do some of the work yourself. But I think it's wonderful, and it was a real encouragement to me when we look at these names, and actually the Bible tells us more about them. And we get a picture of the church at that time in that place with Paul. Just like we have a snapshot today of the people who are here to worship tonight. And there are things there that really encourage me. Paul doesn't just give us airy-fairy theology, you are a body with many members. Paul shows it and lives it out. We are a body with many members. There are people with different gifts: hospitality, nympha; Epaphras, prayer; Tychicus is a faithful minister. People with different gifts. You'll look at here today and you look around and think, yeah, that person's got a wonderful... I won't give them that job, but I'd give them that job because they're wonderfully gifted. You would not necessarily give me the gift, the job of preparing the harvest supper, which you no doubt had and enjoyed a few weeks ago. Was that your job, Steve? No. You won't give him that job. But I've heard this guy preach and you'd give him that job, wouldn't you? So different gifts. Paul, not just thinking, having that experience of the many members, one body theology. But then also the reality of discouragements. How must it have felt for Paul, for Demas, to turn his back on Paul? To go for the world rather than for Christ? I think the reality for probably all of us here, but certainly for us in Morecambe, is that occasionally there are people who set out well, but then they decide to follow the world. And that can be a real discouragement. Well, in a way, it should be an encouragement to us that even the Apostle Paul had that experience. That Demas, someone who walked with him, turned his back on Christ. There are disagreements. I'm sure things are okay at the moment, but maybe you've had disagreements at times as a church. We at Morecambe will have had that as well. But isn't it an encouragement that Paul experienced disagreements with Barnabas, with Mark? There were disagreements there. But again, the reminder that the gospel is about reconciliation and that Paul has dealt with that and now he's able to walk and minister with Mark. Again, a wonderful encouragement to us. And the reality of the gospel striking home in the church, as I hope it does here, with Onesimus, going back to Philemon, what am I going to do? What am I going to do with Philemon? When I go back and I have to explain to him that I'm sorry for what I've done. The gospel meaning something significant in that relationship. It really encouraged me that the Bible is a book of meat. And even this little bit at the end of chapter 4 of a letter that you've no doubt read millions of times has some real meat there to encourage us in our life as a church. And then just finally, what does Paul seem to value? He seems to value faithfulness. Tychicus is a faithful minister. He's coming with Onesimus, our faithful and dear brother. Epaphras prays that you may stand firm in all the will of God. Be mature and fully assured. Paul values faithfulness. God values faithfulness in you as individuals and as a church. There will be discouragements. There may be disagreements. There may be reconciliation. There will be no doubt be challenges. But may we remain faithful to Jesus Christ as Lord. Amen.